Okay. Well, hello, Ian. Thank you for taking the time to speak to my class today. I'm very pleased to introduce everyone to Ian Glassford. Ian is recently retired as Chief Financial Officer from Service Credit Union in Alberta, and he was in that position for the past 10 years. Prior to joining the credit union system in 1993, he worked as a foreign exchange and money market trader for Royal Trust and previously served as a member of the board for Credential Financial and a Canadian investment dealer. He holds his master's degree in business administration from University of Western Ontario and is a certified management accountant. And of course, with the merger of profession, he will now also have the title of chartered professional accountant.
That's right.
Welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
First of all, when I read your paper originally about the concept of enough, I found it very intriguing. So I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit of the backstory, what led to this paper, and I guess, how did your thinking evolve on this topic over your time spent in the credit union sector?
Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks, Daphne. Yeah, it was an interesting situation. It's certainly in the context of the class that you're teaching here. We saw our competitors cutting costs quite aggressively. And so we had to make a decision about, would we cut costs? And that led, as a cooperative, we have more choice. As a cooperative, we get to balance. It's not about maximizing income. And so that brought out a management discussion, which roots in this concept of governance and financial decisions that eventually become strategic and operational, of saying, well, how much did we have to cut relative to them? The answer was probably not zero, because if your competitor is really cutting costs aggressively, even as a cooperative, they can undercut you on pricing quickly and start taking away market share. And also, if their price is better than yours as a cooperative, fair question to the membership saying, why do you exist if you charge me more than the others do? And so we started saying, well, how much do we have to manage our costs down? Because we don't want to overdo it. Aggressive cost cutting can lead to all kinds of problems, which you may or may not cover in the course, but it certainly damages, it's harmful to the lives, obviously, of the people in the company. Careers can end with layoffs and things like that, which is a huge problem. It can also push you to make a lot of decisions that are not necessarily best in the long run for your community, for your stakeholders. And so trying to answer that question, what we discovered fairly quickly was, to know what enough was in terms of cost management, we first needed to know what's enough in terms of profit, in terms of making money. We do need to make enough. And as the slide and right here talks about it, a cooperative is a generational trust. It is very similar in many ways to a family farm or something like that, where you're given it by the generations from before, asked to maintain it, improve it, but you certainly don't want to risk losing it. Back to risk management and governance. We do need, any cooperative needs enough to survive the bad times. The economies go up and down, income and demands will move with it. You do need to make, profit is not a bad word for cooperatives. We can sometimes joke that if you're not for profit, then you are for bankruptcy. It's just a matter of when. The question is how much profit? What's enough? So we need enough to invest in our services. We need enough to survive the bad times. And up to the point of having enough, we've been pushed to make decisions, similar to our competitors. In our case, it was the banks. So we realized we got to figure out how much enough is in terms of profitability. And as we started playing with that, we realized that that's probably the root of, from our perspective, of where a cooperative is so different than what we call a joint stock, which is the profit maximizing entities that we're most familiar with in the world. That turned the light bulb on for us, realizing that if we could get a better handle on the concept of financial enough profit, we would have insights into cost management. We would have insights into money that was available to invest in community or other initiatives that don't deliver a return on investment. And without enough, we realized that we've been sort of flying blind to a certain extent, using instincts and other things to figure out, exactly the points that you're addressing in the class, which is using finance to understand health, sound governance, risk management. And we realized that all of those topics we were, to a certain extent, guessing at, rather than looking at them through a lens of a cooperative, where enough, which is never a line in the conventional financial statements, we needed another line of enough to tell us when we reached it or were short of it. Because short of it, we risk bankruptcy. reached it, we got money to invest elsewhere. So that's kind of how it all started.
Okay. So do you think the cooperative sector is really ready to recognize the concept of enough?
Yeah, another interesting question. At its base level, yes. If you look at cooperatives, they already live this concept, and our opinion is, and I'm going to repeat this a number of times, that the basic difference of a cooperative is rooted in the concept of enough. There are 7 classic cooperative principles that you may or may not have covered in class, but 3 of them definitely have their existence driven by the concept of having enough at a cooperative. The first is economic participation of the members. And that concept comes to play many times in the idea that when a credit union or a cooperative makes more than it needs for all of these purposes that we've got on the screen, it's able to give that money back again to the customer, not to a third-party shareholder. It goes back to the customer, to the member. And so the idea of economic participation is 100% rooted in enough. Once you've got enough, you start giving some back to the customer that you earned the money from. Obviously a very much an enough concept principle. Concern for the community is another one of the 7 cooperative principles. And I would contend that concern for the community is rarely an ROI-based decision. You may do a little bit for profile because you discover that customers come to you because you show the right behavior. But when you start doing it in a significant way, and I'll take, because they're a good example, Van City in Vancouver as an example, they invest significant amounts of money in their community, and certainly in the disadvantaged and the social need of Vancouver. There's no way this is generating a financial return, but that's because Van City has made enough and then carves off the amount above enough and says, we're using it for this purpose. Even though $1 spent here does not return more than $1, it does in terms of our purpose and governance, not financially instead. And the final one I'd flag that I think is founded on the concept of enough is the cooperative principle of education and training, which again, done well, is probably not going to be a high return on investment. When you're educating your members on various things, among other things, you may be educating them against in a credit union business model. We want people to pay off their debts. So we actually spend money to teach people how to pay the debts back faster, even though that actually reduces our income. But we can do it because, again, as a cooperative, we have enough and we can afford the impact of those decisions, both the cost of educating and then the result of people actually holding less debt with us. So yeah, I think they're ready for it. Having said that, I'm now going to turn around and go in the opposite direction, which is I do think they're not really ready for the quantified aspect of enough. They like the qualitative concept, but the quantified aspect, which is the basis of a lot of the material you're covering in your course, is saying when I put a digit on it, I go from being able to do it because I think it's a good idea to actually having a harder line that says not enough, too much. And I don't know that everybody likes that. One, it's very hard to do, for that cooperative specific industry. It may be a food cooperative, it could be a rail cooperative, there's all kinds of cooperatives for that industry, and then for that business, because each company within an industry has different strategies. It's not easy to figure out some approximation of where enough is in terms of income. So one, it's hard work. And the second thing is, when you do it, your reward for hard work is it handcuffs you more and it forces you to confront things that you could have avoided otherwise. And it's human nature to sort of go, why would I work hard to put myself in that difficult position? So I do think conceptually, the cooperative system is more than ready for it. But I think in practice that they need more people like the students in your class who are comfortable saying it's the right thing for the credit union. In terms of governance and risk management, you need to know the approximate digit, even though it may mean confronting that you're not running your cooperative well enough to make enough, or it may mean confronting that you don't have as much to spend on the community or other areas as you thought you did. I think that's a journey that a number of cooperatives still have to go on, and they need people like your students who are comfortable saying it'll make you a better cooperative when you're done. And that's what the members put us there for. It doesn't mean it's always going to be fun, but it is the better thing to do. So I think it's sound governance, making sure that if you're making decisions to put the cooperative at risk, make them with your eyes open. Don't back into it blindfolded because you don't want to confront it. Knowing what the numbers are it's sound governance. It makes for better management in the end. And you certainly, back to the generational trust, you're not risking the cooperative because you're not aware of the line. So yes, I think they get the concept. No, being human beings, no one enjoys having to be accountable. It's not what people love. And so that's a journey for any cooperative or any corporation, frankly.
Okay, so now I think what we'll do is I'll turn it over to you to walk us through your PowerPoints and your in-depth discussion of this whole concept. And we'll circle back again maybe with a closing question or two at the end.
All right. So I know I'm biased. I'll admit it, because you can tell I'm clearly quite passionate about this concept and the value it has for cooperatives. But I really do believe, and you can tell, I think this concept's a great fit for the course you've got, because it's all about the meaning behind the numbers in a financial statement. It's about using information to shape your actions, shape your strategy. It's doing everything that financials were really intended for, which was to inform good management and governance rather than create statements for the sake of statements so you can file them with people. And whether you believe it or not, that happens a lot in corporations. It becomes simply, we do it because we do it. Rather than we do it because if the number goes up or down, it'll drive a meaningful behavior. You're excited about what it may mean for you one way or the other. And so, yeah, I like sharing it with you and the class, because I think it could be very beneficial for some people. So interpreting the financial information to know what you need to manage, applying funds to strategy, taking unpopular action when the entity is at risk with some numeric parameters rather than management by opinion or anecdote is the heart of this, right? It's taking it away from thinking we are here, feeling we are there. Someone's got a story about this. Someone doesn't agree there, and turning it into something that's a little more impartial creates a better dialogue. And so I think enough is just awesome in this. So from my perspective, enough financially and for running a cooperative is the big so what. Right? You produce numbers, you produce financials, and the classic question, especially for people in finance, is so what? You're creating data, whether it's management accounting data, it may be data on the performance of a product campaign or otherwise, but the question always has to be, so what? When you're done the numbers, if they're high, will you change your behavior? If they're low, will they change your behavior? And the concept of enough is all about exactly that, saying you are going to change your behavior. If you've got more than enough, it calls the question to a cooperative of, what are you using it for? You were created by the members to do something that wasn't being satisfied by the joint stock model. Are you fulfilling it, or is the money just sitting there doing nothing because you didn't know it was there, that you had more than enough? If you have less than enough, do you understand that you're risking your company? And are you comfortable it was a sound risk to take? So, like I say, I think that that the concept of enough is the heart of the cooperative difference and why cooperatives are relevant in the world. And my own opinion is that on that basis, cooperatives really should rule the world. And the big question then becomes, so why don't they? And the reason I think they should rule the world, if you look at it, is they create balance. So in many ways, you could say balance is the story rather than enough, but I'm a financial guy. I like enough. They balance the tension between the customer, the shareholder. Frankly, I could have added the community and others. Because your mandate is not maximize profit first, which creates a filter for behavior. And I think I've got a slide say it's not wrong, but it creates a filter that drives certain behavior and drives certain unintended consequences. And that's one of the examples is the concept of agency, where the person making the decision is removed from the consequence and not necessarily acting on behalf of the ultimate group affected by these kinds of things. Externalities is another expression in economics for anybody who's suffered through that. Externalities, pollution is a classic externality where the company polluting can make a lot more money, which is good for them, but it's not good for the community they do business in. Because a cooperative doesn't have to maximize income, they can support customers or communities that a joint stock wouldn't, because it doesn't offer the return on equity needed. So I can take our example as credit unions. We have in the past bought branches in small communities from banks, because the bank looks and says the return on equity operating in XYZ Alberta is less than we expect from our investments. And so we have in the past bought the branches saying, well, 7% ROE is just fine by us. That's enough. It'll work for us. And so cooperatives can do these kinds of things that others can't because of that. And we're not motivated, as I note here, to cut the corners to drive a higher ROE. So the joint stock profit maximizing entities never have enough. And it's that contrast I'm trying to bring out is it's not bad. Like I say, it's a viable model. It's resulted in a lot of things that are good on our world, but it also brings baggage. And it's very attractive to have the cooperative model where enough exists to create a balance. Because like anything, a healthy environment is where you have more than one alternative and they can push against each other. And so a cooperative model, because of enough, is able to stand and say, I can offer lower cost checking accounts. I can offer products. In our case, recently we created in the last few years loan products to help people who had been going to the cash stores and things like that. And so we created an alternative because a number of our members were using them, and we looked at trying to create a way to do this. Do we make a lot of money at it? No. Do we make some? Yeah, we make enough. And by doing so, we have created pressure on the other model to bring its prices down, et cetera, et cetera. And so enough matters for the success of the cooperative, but it also matters because of the impact the cooperative can have on the rest of the industry and things like that. So yeah, you can look at a cooperative in terms of its ability to help with balancing environmental impacts. You can look at it in terms of how we can help the customer with enough. And in our case, and I probably talk to it later, but we share $31 million of our profits back to the customer. That's $31 million that would have gone otherwise to a shareholder, which is, whether it be a pension fund or somebody else, but often to, for lack of a better expression, the 1%. Is that bad that it goes to 1%? No. But is it good that 31 million goes back to the average Albertan? Yeah. Because of that 31 million, if you've got, say, a $300,000 mortgage, once we have enough, we give the profit back. So you got about, we just finished our fiscal year, so you got about $500 back from us on a $300,000 mortgage. Over the last 5 years, you got something like $2,500 back. For a borrower, that's transformational money in terms of disposable income. Yeah, that matters to us. We think it's important, and I think it does matter to them as well. And so enough makes it possible. And by quantifying enough, I can prove to my company that giving back $31 million to the people who deal with us is safe and healthy. Back to the root of your class in terms of financial health, risk management, good governance. In this terms, the governance is making sure you're fulfilling your potential as a cooperative. I think enough has a huge impact on business ethics decisions. You can study the cases of huge corporate governance failure, and they're almost always rooted in, at first, a joint stock profit maximizing entity, and this pressure, this constant pressure for more. And I guess I'll bring that out, that contrast between more and enough. And you have to ask, what world would you prefer to be living in? One where people function on the basis of enough, or one where there's always more? And cooperatives have the potential to do this. I want to emphasize potential, because we're not perfect. And I touched on it before, this whole concept of the inequitable distribution of income. When you look at so much of the social tension in our world right now, I would believe that a great deal of it is rooted in this sense of the world is not being fair. We've got lots of studies, and if you want, you can dig up the video of the monkeys who are getting cucumbers and grapes. And when you're getting something, you're happy until you see somebody getting something better than you for the same thing, and that brings out a very strong negative reaction. And I think this whole distribution of wealth in the world is part of this challenge. It's not an absolute, it's a relative. And so yes, today I live so much better than my grandparents did, but I still look and say, but it's unfair what's happening relative to other people around me. And that's the root of a great deal of this social tension. I think cooperatives have the potential, because of enough, to create greater balance in that regard. So I will emphasize, though, that cooperatives are not immune to these risks, but enough helps us balance them. They create a better balanced culture in that regard. So, the idea is the power of cooperative is such a thing as enough. And I think it's an incredibly magic word, not just financially, but in terms of values and social and things like that. What has it meant for us as service? Back to the example where we started, right? The major banks, with very sound reasons, had engaged in waves of layoffs since 2008 to bring their costs down to address the damages they were seeing elsewhere. We were confronted with this, and back to the beginning of the discussion, we had this whole controversy of, do we have to match them? Are we risking the company if we don't? By putting more discipline into using our financial statements to find out what enough looked like, we never laid anybody off. Actually, our credit union has never laid anybody off in its history, even though it went through the huge economic crash in the 80s. And then we went through the financial crisis of 2008, and then oil prices collapsed on us. We have never laid anybody off in all of this time. And it's because of enough. We're able to balance it. We can be patient. We can let attrition do its job. Let people retire naturally. Yes, our income is lower as a result, but our perspective is, for the members, for the employees, for the credit union, it's the better thing to do. Leaving people in fear of their jobs, in fear of their company, if you can avoid it, you would. And I'm sure the banks would as well. But they don't get the same choice as we do. They've got shareholders breathing down their necks, asking for return. We've got shareholders breathing down our necks saying, make our lives better, make our world better. And that gives us room to make these kinds of choices. It's let us, like I say, it's let us share 31 million this year. I'd have to tally it up. I know if I included our dividends on shares, common shares, and other shares, since we were created about a decade ago, we have shared about $500 million with average people in Alberta. That matters to us. That's our example, again, of enough making a big difference. Environmentally, we're not as big a player there as you'd find for some other credit unions, but an example would be our head office is a LEED Silver certified building, so we put quite a bit of money into significantly reducing the environmental impact, the footprint of our building. And again, we could make these kinds of decisions and say, we've got more than enough. How do you want to allocate it? This towards protecting the employees from layoffs, this towards giving profit back to the members, this towards helping on the environmental side of things. So you can't do it all. You can't be everything to all things to everybody, but you can sure make a difference in these kinds of ways. So this is where I think enough is a big deal, and it ties back to finances. So for people who are in finance going, oh, what a boring thing to do for a living. Well, it can be, but you can see this is all financial. And it's what's transforming our ability to make a difference as a cooperative. It is absolutely strategy connected to financial. It is absolutely environmental impact. It's absolutely hundreds of people. Because by our calculation, we had to lay off about 280 people to bring our costs equivalent to the banks. So that's 280 people who kept their jobs instead. And so it's not abstract. It is finance. And if we had managed our finances well, 280 people could have ended up out of work instead. You can make a huge difference as a person in the space, in the financial space. So that's kind of my story of enough. I could go on and on and on. I'll give a few more slides just to give kind of a visual of what we're talking about. So we talked already about how more than that we've got for other purposes. So this is kind of a visual concept of what I'm getting at when you compare us to, say, a bank. To a certain extent, when you talk about the profit of a joint stock bank, it's a bit about how high is up, right? How much is enough? Well, I own shares in banks. My answer is there's never enough. And so this kind of gives you the sense of once we've hit enough relative to a joint stock, we have all this money to play with, and our members, our owners, our customers support it because the customer is the owner, right? That's the solution to a lot of these tensions, was creating a cooperative. The customer becomes the owner, and that transforms the entire equation. And so that gives you a flavor for, visually what we're talking about. So raises an obvious question. Why don't we rule the world then? I would contend that one reason is no one knows what enough looks like. And the end result of that is you have poor financial discipline. Your difference may be lost in inefficiency because you aren't pressured enough to address various costs. At times, you take too much risk, back to the material you cover in the course, and you face the possibility or probability of going out of business when things go bad, but you didn't know it because you hadn't quantified these things. And another one, and it's not a small one actually in corporations, is chasing personal interests or good ideas that just don't matter that much to the members. You will find this all the time in your business life of people who are hired to run a department and they want to spend a lot of money on it, but the shareholder actually doesn't care. It's true it makes it a better department, but it's not where the shareholder wanted the money spent. And if it's not spent in the right places, you don't make a difference anymore. You do to yourself, I suppose, but you don't to them. And the other thing credit unions and co-ops is they try to be too many things to too many people. And the end result is when you spread yourself thin, you're almost invisible to people. So if you're wondering, why don't we rule the world, given my eloquent discussion, it's because I think because we don't have a good sense of enough. And the end result is instead, and I got my colors mixed up here, but anyways, what happens is your credit union difference, in this case, cooperative difference, is a tiny sliver because you've got a layer of inefficiency and you've got a layer of money that was spent on things that didn't matter. And so in terms of what the market or the customer, the member sees, it's a pretty thin difference between you and in our case, a bank. And the mandate's on us and management and you guys, eventually when you're out in the working world, to use that financial information to push the company saying, we're not making the difference we could. We're not making the difference we should. We're going to have to try a little harder. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ian. Just before we conclude, I just have one quick question. Certainly, Service Credit Union is a very large organization. So I'm just wondering, do you perceive any sort of divide between a large and a small cooperative in terms of adopting the concept of enough? Do you think a small co-op could do it as well?
Yeah, actually, if anything, I'd say it's almost the other way around. I think that a smaller cooperative, one of the great virtues of being a smaller cooperative, because I worked in one at one time, is you're so much closer to the member. You're so much closer to the community in many ways, and you're closer to your company. It's easier to see the entire flow of a company when it's smaller. And so even though you may be doing it by instinct, your instincts of what enough looks like in those circumstances is usually much better than me as the CFO of a $15 billion credit union with 100 branches and 2,500 staff. You can, as a smaller cooperative, you can see it much clearer. And it matters more. It's back to the agency and things like that, this concept of being removed from the impacts of your decisions. In a smaller cooperative, it's hard to avoid the consequence of your decisions. And that's great news for the company and the members, because as the manager, you pay more attention. It hits you faster. Do smaller cooperatives need to know enough? Just as much as anybody else does. I don't think enough is size or scale relative. It's all about ensuring you remain viable, true for any cooperative, having a sense of how much more you have than enough to invest in making a difference to your members and community. That's your purpose. And so very true again for small versus large. It's about sound governance, understanding whether you're making a difference or not. It's about sound financial management. True again for large versus or small credit unions. And then the slide we've got on right now, which is these concepts apply to a small or a big credit union or cooperative as it may be. So no, I think that we all face the same tensions, whether we're big or small. I think I've actually got one more. I'll pop up there. Yeah. Any business, any cooperative faces these tensions. The virtue is we have more opportunity for balance between them rather than having one of these bubbles huge and the other one's quite small. So that's the opportunity. The challenge is, how do you balance it? And it's true for all of us. And the better you can quantify or become impartial about what you have, whether you have enough, where you don't, the better positioned you are to be able to say, what have we got to manage the tension between the credit union differentiation versus employee satisfaction versus the need for profit versus the member or customer satisfaction. And I would say, this little diagram is true for a small credit union or a co-op or a large one. And enough solves it in the same way. And most of all, for all of them, I would say, back to we should rule the world. We haven't realized our potential, small or large. The members created you to realize your potential to help them. And I think enough, this concept of financial enough, is the key to opening that door and all of us getting better at it. So no, I think it's a universal principle for any cooperative.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ian. You've certainly given us a very thought-provoking presentation. You've given us a lot of food for thought, and I'm certainly hoping that the students in the course will be able to go back and apply this concept and introduce it to their cooperatives and credit unions. So once again,
I hope so too.
thank you so much for your time. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.